Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Podcast Accelerator, the thrice-weekly show that brings you podcast education, industry insights, and straight-talking reactions to podcasting news. I am your host, that British podcast guy, Mark Asquith, and I'm also CEO and co-founder here at Rebel Base Media, the podcast tech company that creates the Podcast Success Academy, podcast websites, Productivity, Rebel Base Studios, and Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host, where you can get your first month of podcast hosting for just $1, and where you can transfer in an existing podcast to take advantage of Captivate's growth-oriented podcasting tools. You can transfer an existing podcasting completely for free. Now, today on the show, we're going to kind of pick up the thread of kind of the network chat that we had a couple of episodes ago. We're going to discuss single and multi RSS feed opportunities when it comes to branding your show and setting, for example, things like seasons up. Okay, it's going to be quite an interesting topic. As interesting as I can make RSS feeds, I'm not a magician, but we'll see what we can do with that one. But look, before I do that, just a quick reminder that the wonderful team at AWeber are still offering you 90 days completely for free to try their email marketing platform. Now, I know it sounds weird to keep hearing me say this, but it's so very vital. I'm sat here at Rebel Base Media in our podcasting studio. I'm looking at the plans that we've got for the Podcast Success Academy, the relaunch of that, the version 2 of it. You know what it's like. We like to upgrade things. Version 2 of that, which is coming out in August this year, just before Podcast Movement. And the big thing here that I want you to understand is that a massive part of that replanning is to do with how to build and engage with your audience. And email is right at the center of that. So many podcasters still don't get that is a vital thing to do, all right? And AWeber have been helping me with this, okay? That's why I trust them so much. I want you to go try them out. Go and try them out for 90 days completely for free at markasquith.com/AWeber. Now, look, RSS feeds are boring, but right now they power podcasting, okay? They're the backbone of podcasting. Open RSS feed, really simple syndication. That's what RSS stands for. So let's look today at two options for your podcast RSS feed when you've decided to rebrand your podcast. We've got a number of different kind of ways to deal with this one. We've got a number of ways that we can handle RSS feed. We've got a number of ways depending on what we choose for our brand. Now, we talked on one of the previous episodes about how to create a very simple podcast network and the benefits of doing that. And this kind of follows on from that, because obviously if you've got a podcast network, for each show on that network, you've got a different RSS feed. So with Captivate.fm, our podcast host, you can have unlimited RSS feeds, unlimited podcasts for one monthly cost. You don't have to worry like you do with a lot of the other hosts about paying per show. I think that's quite an antiquated way of doing things. So with people like Captivate, like us, you can host many RSS feeds. Now, that's a great idea. But what about if you kind of think a little bit differently about that as well? And what happens if you've got different types of content that are kind of all one podcast? Or maybe you've got different seasons. Well, this is where you start to think about, well, actually, can I have one feed or should I have multiple feeds? Now, let me give you an example of some of these different variations. So what you'll tend to find is that many people will build archives of their show. So, for example, I've got the 7-Minute Mentor. I've got 4 archives of that. There are 607 episodes of the 7-Minute Mentor, and I've got one feed for every 150 episodes, because otherwise the feeds get too big. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the rest of them, they struggle to read the feed. It becomes too big and a little bit unwieldy. So I've created an archive, 150 episodes, 7-Minute Mentor Archive Volume 1. Archive Volume 2 is episodes 151 through 300, 301 to 450, and then 450 actually goes up to 607, so there's a few more in there. But I've got 4 RSS feeds for that one. Okay, now when it comes to rebranding your podcast, you actually face a very similar scenario, because let's say that you want to release your podcast in seasons. Well, guess what? Apple, a couple of years ago, mid to late 2017, gave us a whole host of new tags. So inside Captivate.fm as a hosting company, you'll see that you can now choose from drop-downs between, okay, is my show seasonal or episodic? Can I set up bonus, trailer, or quote-unquote normal episodes? These are the new tags that Apple Podcasts gave us a few years ago. And what they allow us to do is mark and group things together. So, for example, I could mark something as a trailer. If you go and look at this feed in Apple Podcasts for the Podcast Accelerator, there is a very simple trailer. Now, The second thing with this is that you can mark shows as seasons. So what I could do is on my look back through, if you do a search for me in any of the podcast apps, do a search for Mark Asquith, and in particular the interview series, leadership, marketing, startup and personal development interviews, they were all one chronological series. But I decided to categorize them because each interview I did fell into one of these 4 buckets. So what I decided to do, and this was before Apple Podcasts gave me the seasons tag, I decided to essentially split them out into 4 different seasons, 4 different categories, 1 personal development, 1 leadership, 1 marketing, 1 startup interviews. And I put them on separate feeds. And what I said was that this is Volume 1, Season 1, Volume 1, Season 2, Season 3, Season 4. And I was able to have multiple RSS feeds. And then in 2017, Apple came along and said, well, look, Marco, you don't need to do that anymore because, look, we've given you this other tag. You can now group them together. You could group these 50 together as personal development, Season 1. You could group these 50 together as Season 2, marketing interviews, and so on and so forth. But I didn't have that back in the day in 2017. And still, right now, you can't label seasons. So I couldn't say Season 1, this is the title for Season 1. Season 2, this is the title for Season 2. I still couldn't do that in Apple Podcasts. So, thinking a little bit bigger than that, if you have a show that is genuinely in seasons, all right? Serial is in seasons. The podcast Serial is in seasons. That new tag that Apple gave us works really, really well for that. What it doesn't work so well for is if you start thinking about network opportunities like we discussed a few episodes ago. If you think, do you know what? I've got an opportunity here to create some content that can run alongside this other podcast. Rather than have this in seasons, what I'm going to do is have 1 feed over there for this thing, 1 feed over here for this thing. That then shows Apple Podcasts and Spotify, they're my network. I can get that view more on this publisher tag. You know, the one where if you're an Apple Podcast, you can click view more from this publisher, click that and you see all of our podcasts. I can get that. I've got a wider brand. I've got a bigger brand. I'm theoretically looking more like an audio production company, or certainly a company that produces multiple podcasts. I am genuinely a network. So when you're thinking about this single versus multiple RSS feed options, there are a number of things to consider. If you're a truly seasonal show, then by all means use 1 RSS feed with one season at a time marked Season 1, Season 2, Season 3, Season 4, and so on. You can do that very easily in Captivate. It's as easy as popping a number in. Or if you want to dive into that kind of network idea, if you want to categorize things off a little bit, you can start to get this network feel, this brand feel, which I think all podcasters will be looking to go to in the future. You know, if you look at Glenn the Geek, the Horse Radio Network, that's what he does so very, very well, all right? Build your own network out, gives you brand recognition. It gives you a nice position in the industry. It makes you look valid, all right? And using multiple RSS feeds to do that is a really, really strong way of doing it, okay? So just the point of this episode is to kind of make you aware of some options. It's not to say, here's this, here's that, make a decision now. It's not to say, this is right, this is wrong. It's more a case of just saying, look, these options do exist. They're not that complex. And with hosts like Captivate.fm, where you can have multiple RSS feeds, you know, under one account without paying any more for them, it's a very strong way to build your brand. Okay. So just please start to think about that. I'm just kind of giving you some very honest advice, some very honest feedback, and just trying to open up the podcasting space in terms of knowledge for you, all right? So thank you so much for joining me here on the Podcast Accelerator. Please remember to tell all of your podcasting friends that the show is available to listen to for free in any app that supports podcasts. And if you're wondering what the best next step to take for your own podcast is, whether you're a new podcaster or you're a bit of a veteran podcaster like moi, go ahead and take our short 5-minute survey where I'm going to help you to diagnose and solve the main issue holding your show and your podcast growth back. And I'm also going to give you access not only to the solution to that problem, but also access to our free, vibrant Podcast Rebellion community, weekly free group coaching from me, actionable, insider-only emails, and even a free invitation to the Podcast Success Academy. So go ahead and invest 5 minutes now to grow your podcast by heading to rebelbasemedia.io/grow. And until next time, thank you so much, and never forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.